What happens when the most feared alien empress in the galaxy discovers that the quiet human engineer she captured isn't just another primitive species? What occurs when a single moment of unleashed human potential rewrites the cosmic balance of power forever? Sometimes, one demonstration is all it takes to turn predator into protector, conqueror into ally, and skeptic into believer. This is the story of how humanity's greatest strength isn't our weapons or our ships, it's our unbreakable spirit and the terrifying lengths we'll go to protect those we care about. Prepare yourself for a tale where underestimation becomes the galaxy's most dangerous mistake. The Zarathan flagship Crimson Dominion cut through the void like a blade through silk, its massive hull bristling with weapons that could crack planets. On the bridge, Queen Vexera stood 7 feet tall, her chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the red battle lights. 6 arms moved in fluid coordination as she reviewed the latest intelligence reports, each limb ending in razor-sharp claws that had personally ended the lives of countless enemies. Her compound eyes, each the size of a human fist, reflected the holographic displays showing the pathetic human colony ship limping through space ahead of them. Another batch of primitive mammals, hissed her tactical officer, Commander Zektal. His mandibles clicked in amusement as he analyzed the human vessel's primitive fusion drives and basic deflector shields. Their weapons are barely more advanced than chemical propellants. This will be over before it begins, my queen. Vexera's 4 primary eyes fixed on the human ship while her secondary eyes continued monitoring other displays. The Zarathan Empire had conquered 17 different species over the past millennium, each one falling before their superior technology and ruthless military doctrine. These humans would be no different. Their ship, though large, moved with the sluggish grace of a wounded animal. No advanced energy signatures, no exotic matter drives, no quantum shields. Just another weak species trying to spread their seed among the stars. Scan for their strongest specimens, Vexera commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat. I want their best warriors, their smartest scientists, their most influential leaders. The rest can feed the biorecyclers. The targeting systems locked onto the human colony ship with predatory precision. Within minutes, boarding pods erupted from the Zarathan flagship's launch bays like metallic spores. Each pod contained a squad of Zarathan warriors, their bodies enhanced with cybernetic implants and armed with plasma weapons that could melt through starship hulls. They had performed this dance of conquest hundreds of times before. The human ship's pathetic defensive fire barely scratched the boarding pod's armor. A few pulse cannon shots that wouldn't have troubled a Zarathan shuttle, some missile salvos that their point defense systems swatted aside like insects. Vexera watched with growing boredom as her forces breached the human hull in 17 different locations simultaneously. The screaming started almost immediately. Resistance is minimal, my queen, reported squad leader Kathvar from aboard the human vessel. Their security forces are using primitive kinetic weapons. Projectile-based, chemical propellant. Our armor is completely immune. Beginning specimen collection now. Through her warrior's helmet feeds, Vexera observed the chaos aboard the human ship. Families huddled in corridors while her soldiers sorted through them like livestock, separating the useful from the expendable. The humans' terror was palpable, their wide eyes and pale faces showing the same defeated expression she had seen on 16 other species. Some tried to fight with their crude weapons, others begged for mercy in their simple language. All reactions she had witnessed before. But, then, something caught her attention. In the engineering section, one human wasn't running or fighting or cowering. A male, average height for his species, wearing simple work clothes stained with some kind of lubricant. He stood calmly at his station while chaos erupted around him, his hands moving steadily across primitive control panels. He looked to be in his 30s by human standards, with short brown hair and unremarkable features. Nothing about him suggested he was anything more than a maintenance worker. Bring me that one, Vexera commanded, highlighting the calm human engineer on her display. There's something different about him. My queen, he appears to be merely a technician, Zektal observed, his mandibles twitching with confusion. Surely you want their military commanders or their scientists. I want him, Vexera repeated, her tone brooking no argument. Now. 20 minutes later, the human male stood in the center of the Zarathan flagship's interrogation chamber, his hands secured behind his back with energy restraints that could hold a charging rhino beast. Around him, the curved walls displayed the accumulated knowledge of 17 conquered civilizations, a reminder of Zarathan supremacy. He looked small and fragile in the vast chamber, yet his posture remained straight and his breathing steady. Vexera descended from her elevated platform, her 6 arms moving in the ritualistic patterns that had preceded the interrogation of thousands of prisoners. This human male should be trembling, should be begging for his life or the lives of his people. Instead, he watched her approach with what appeared to be curious interest. "I am Queen Vexera, supreme ruler of the Zarathan Empire," she announced in perfectly translated human English. "You will tell me about your species' military capabilities, your hidden weapons, your secret alliances. You will reveal the locations of your other colonies and the weaknesses of your defensive systems." The human tilted his head slightly, studying her with brown eyes that held no trace of fear. "I'm David Chen, Chief Engineering Officer of the UES New Horizon. Nice to meet you, Your Majesty." The casual tone stopped Vexera mid-stride. In 17 conquests, no prisoner had ever responded to her initial interrogation with anything resembling politeness. Usually there was screaming, threats, desperate bargaining, or sullen silence. Never this calm friendliness. "You misunderstand your situation, human," Vexera said, allowing a note of menace to creep into her voice. "Your ship has been captured. Your people are being processed. You are my prisoner, and your survival depends entirely on your cooperation." David nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that's how you see it. From my perspective, you've made a mistake, but it's not too late to fix it." Commander Zektal's mandibles snapped in outrage. "Insolent creature! You dare suggest the Queen has made an error?" But Vexera raised one of her arms, silencing her subordinate. This human's behavior was unprecedented, and she found herself genuinely curious about his apparent fearlessness. "Explain your meaning, David Chen." "Well," David said, shifting slightly to find a more comfortable position despite his restraints, "you've attacked a civilian colony ship under the protection of the Human Federation. That makes this an act of war against a species you clearly know nothing about. The smart play would be to release my people, make some kind of reparations, and hope we're feeling diplomatic when our response fleet arrives." Vexera's compound eyes flared with amusement. "Response fleet? Human, we have been monitoring your communications for weeks. Your nearest military vessels are months away, and they are as primitive as this colony ship. What possible threat could your species pose to the Zarathan Empire?" David was quiet for a long moment, and something changed in his expression. The friendliness remained, but underneath it, Vexera glimpsed something else. Something that made her instincts whisper warnings she had never needed to heed before. "Your Majesty," David said softly, "you've conquered 17 species. That's impressive. But you've never met humans before, have you?" "Obviously not," Zektal interjected. "Your species only achieved interstellar flight 50 of your years ago. You are newcomers to the galaxy, weak and inexperienced." "That's true," David agreed. "We are newcomers. But you know what we did during those 50 years while we were learning to travel between stars? We fought. Not against aliens, against each other. We've been perfecting the art of warfare for our entire recorded history. Every single human alive today is descended from survivors of 10,000 years of constant conflict." Vexera felt the first stirring of unease. All species war among themselves before achieving interstellar unity. This is not unique. David's smile didn't reach his eyes anymore. "Your Majesty, in the time it took your people to conquer 17 species over a millennium, humanity fought 2 world wars that each killed more people than your entire species has eliminated in all your conquests combined. We've turned warfare into a science, an art form, a religion. And the colony ship you've just attacked? It's carrying 8,000 people, including 1,500 children." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Vexera found herself taking an involuntary step backward as something primal in her genetic memory recognized the presence of a true predator. This human male, this unremarkable-looking maintenance worker, had shifted from friendly prisoner to something else entirely. "Are you threatening me?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled. "No, Your Majesty," David replied, his tone still perfectly polite. I'm explaining the situation. You see, humans have a peculiar psychological trait. We form incredibly strong emotional bonds with our social groups, especially with our young. And, when those bonds are threatened, we become something your species has never encountered before. We become unstoppable. Ridiculous, Zektal spat. You are one human, restrained and helpless. Your primitive ship is captured. Your people are being sorted for processing. What could you possibly do? David looked directly at Queen Vexera, and, in that moment, she saw something in his eyes that made her understand why her instincts were screaming. It wasn't anger or fear or desperation. It was the cold, calculating expression of someone who had already decided that everything else in the room was going to die, and was simply working out the most efficient method. Your Majesty, David said quietly, would you like me to show you what humans do when you threaten our families? Before Vexera could respond, alarms began shrieking throughout the flagship. Emergency lighting bathed the interrogation chamber in pulsing red as her tactical officer's voice crackled through the comm system. My queen! Massive energy spike from the human colony ship. They're doing something to their fusion reactor. David smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Vexera had ever seen. That would be my wife. Dr. Sarah Chen, chief physicist and deputy engineering officer. I taught her a few things about overload procedures. You have approximately 4 minutes to get your boarding parties off our ship before she turns it into a miniature star. Impossible. Zektal snarled. No species would sacrifice themselves so readily. You're right, David agreed. Most species wouldn't. But humans aren't most species. We're the descendants of primates who learned to kill with tools. We're the children of civilizations that glorified dying for ideals. We're the inheritors of warriors who chose death before dishonor for thousands of generations. And, Sarah? Sarah has calculated that sacrificing our ship will cripple your flagship and give our escape pods enough time to reach the asteroid field where your sensors can't track them. The alarms grew louder, and Vexera could hear the stress in her crew's voices as they reported impossible energy readings from the human vessel. Her mind raced through the tactical implications. If the human ship detonated with enough force while docked to her flagship, it could damage critical systems, leave them vulnerable, strand them in this system for weeks while repairs were made. Recall all boarding parties immediately, she commanded. Emergency separation protocols. But David shook his head slowly. Too late for that, Your Majesty. Sarah's already locked out all external access to the reactor controls. Your people are trapped aboard our ship. In 3 minutes and 40 seconds, they're going to experience what we call a stellar event at very close range. You're insane. Zektal screamed. You'll kill your own people. Some of them, yes, David admitted with devastating calm. But the children are already in the escape pods. The elderly and injured are secured in the most protected sections of the ship. Sarah's arranged it so that your boarding parties will take the brunt of the explosion. Probably 90% casualties on your side, maybe 30% on ours. From a strategic standpoint, it's an excellent trade ratio. Vexera stared at this unremarkable human male who was casually discussing the deaths of hundreds of his own people as an acceptable military tactic. In 17 conquests, she had never encountered anything like this level of ruthless calculation combined with absolute dedication to group survival. 3 minutes, David announced, somehow keeping track of time without any visible chronometer. Would you like to reconsider your position, Your Majesty? Because once Sarah initiates the final sequence, even she won't be able to stop it. And, I should mention, the explosion will probably breach your main reactor shielding. Your flagship will be crippled, your crew will be irradiated, and you'll be dead in space when the Human Federation response fleet arrives in about 6 weeks. The implications hit Vexera like a physical blow. This wasn't the desperate gambit of a defeated enemy. This was a precisely calculated strategy executed by people who understood warfare at a level the Zarathan Empire had never needed to reach. These humans were willing to sacrifice themselves not in a fury of hopeless rage, but as part of a carefully planned military operation. 2 minutes 30 seconds, David said helpfully. I should probably mention that every human colony ship carries detailed recordings of everything that happens to it. Those records are automatically transmitted to hidden beacons when certain trigger conditions are met. Like, for example, being attacked by unknown aliens. So even if you somehow survive the next few minutes, the Federation will know exactly what happened here, exactly what your ships look like, and exactly how to track down your homeworld. Vexera's mind reeled as she grasped the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just an attack on a single colony ship. This was first contact with a species that had turned warfare into an exact science, and she had just provided them with detailed intelligence about Zarathan capabilities while giving them perfect justification for retaliation. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David's expression didn't change. "Immediate release of all human prisoners. Safe passage for our escape pods to the nearest Federation outpost. And a promise that your people will never attack human civilians again." "And if I refuse?" David shrugged. "Then, in about 2 minutes, you'll discover why humans have a reputation for making very expensive enemies." The interrogation chamber fell silent except for the shrieking alarms and the increasingly panicked voices of the crew reporting catastrophic energy buildup from the human vessel. Vexera looked into David Chen's eyes and saw the truth that would haunt her for the rest of her life. This ordinary-looking human engineer had just taught the most feared military power in the galaxy what real warfare looked like. And he had done it without firing a single shot. 90 seconds, David announced calmly, as if he were commenting on the weather rather than counting down to mutual annihilation. Queen Vexera's 6 arms moved in frantic gestures as she opened communication channels to her boarding parties. "All units, immediate evacuation. Emergency transport, priority Alpha." "My queen," came the desperate voice of squad leader Kathvar through the calm, "the humans have sealed all airlocks from their side. We're trapped in their engineering sections. The walls are getting hot, and there's some kind of energy field preventing our cutting tools from working." Vexera's compound eyes fixed on David with a mixture of rage and newfound respect. This human had anticipated every aspect of their standard boarding procedures and countered them with ruthless efficiency. "How?" she demanded. "Humans have been boarding each other's ships for centuries," David replied matter-of-factly. "We know every trick, every countermeasure, every possible escape route. Sarah didn't just lock your people in our ship, she locked them in the specific sections where the reactor explosion will create a focused plasma stream. It's not random, Your Majesty. It's precise." Commander Zektal was frantically working at his control station, his mandibles clicking in distress. "My queen, our transport beams can't penetrate whatever field they've generated. Our warriors are requesting permission to blast through the bulkheads, but that could breach the reactor containment from this side." 60 seconds, David said helpfully. "Though I should mention, attempting to breach our reactor containment from your side would actually make the explosion significantly larger." Sarah's accounted for that possibility too. Vexera felt something she hadn't experienced in over 200 years of conquest and warfare, complete tactical helplessness. Every move she could make had already been anticipated and countered by these supposedly primitive humans. "What kind of species are you?" she whispered. "The kind that survived," David replied simply. "Your Majesty, you've spent a millennium conquering species that had achieved peace among themselves before reaching the stars. You've never fought anyone who still remembered how to wage total war. Humans never forgot. We never had the luxury of forgetting." The alarms reached a crescendo as energy readings from the human colony ship climbed into ranges that shouldn't have been possible with primitive fusion technology. On the tactical displays, Vexera could see her flagship's own reactors beginning to show stress readings from the proximity to whatever the humans had turned their propulsion system into. 45 seconds, David continued conversationally. "You know, Sarah's actually quite brilliant. She figured out how to create a cascading fusion reaction by introducing quantum instabilities into the containment field matrix. It's theoretically impossible with standard technology, but humans have this tendency to make impossible things work when we're sufficiently motivated." "You're bluffing," Zektal snarled, though his voice carried no conviction. "No engineer would sacrifice their own ship." David's expression hardened. "Commander, 30 minutes ago, your warriors started separating human children from their parents. You made those children cry. You terrified families who had never done anything more aggressive than file immigration paperwork. When you did that, you crossed a line that my species has spent 10,000 years defining with blood and bone. The truth in David's words hit Vexera like a physical force. She had seen the feeds from her boarding parties, watched her warriors efficiently sorting human civilians with the same casual indifference they had shown towards 16 other species. She had witnessed the tears, the terror, the desperate parents trying to shield their young. It had been routine. Standard procedure. 30 seconds, David announced. Your Majesty, I want to be very clear about something. This isn't revenge. This isn't anger. This is education. You're about to learn why humans have never lost a war when the survival of our children was at stake. Vexera's mind raced through her options. She could try to destroy the human ship before it exploded, but that would definitely kill her boarding parties and might not prevent the chain reaction. She could attempt to disengage her flagship, but the docking clamps were locked from the human side and there wasn't time to cut through them. She could try to beam her people off the human ship, but whatever field they had generated was completely blocking transport technology that had never failed before. Or she could surrender. 20 seconds, David said, and, for the first time, Vexera heard something other than clinical calm in his voice. There was sadness there, and regret, but also an implacable determination that made her understand exactly what kind of enemy the Zarathan Empire had just made. I accept your terms, she said quickly. David tilted his head slightly. Which terms were those, Your Majesty? Release of all human prisoners, safe passage for your people, and no future attacks on human civilians, Vexera said, the words tumbling out as the countdown continued. 15 seconds, David noted. I'm afraid it's a bit more complicated than that now. You see, once Sarah initiates the final sequence, I can't stop her. She's following a very specific protocol that every human ship captain is trained in. The survival of the children takes precedence over everything else, including my life. Vexera felt her world collapse around her. Then, we're all going to die? 10 seconds, David said softly. Not all of us, Your Majesty. The children will survive. And they'll remember what happened here. They'll grow up knowing that their parents died protecting them from aliens who saw them as livestock to be processed. They'll join the Federation fleet when they're old enough, and they'll make sure this never happens again. 5 seconds. The interrogation chamber fell completely silent except for the shrieking alarms and the barely audible sound of Vexera's hearts beating in terror. She stared at David Chen, this ordinary-looking human engineer who had just demonstrated the most sophisticated psychological warfare she had ever witnessed. He had given her the choice between surrender and mutual destruction, then revealed that surrender might not even be possible. 4 seconds. Wait! Vexera screamed. There must be something. Some way to stop this. 3 seconds. David met her eyes one last time, and she saw something there that would haunt her dreams for the rest of her very long life. It wasn't hatred or fury or bloodlust. It was love. Pure, unconditional, protective love for the humans aboard that colony ship, especially the children. And that love had transformed this mild-mannered engineer into something more dangerous than any weapon the Zarathan Empire had ever faced. 2 seconds. Sarah! David called out, raising his voice for the first time since his capture. Code Phoenix 7. Silence. The alarms continued to wail, but the countdown in David's voice had stopped. Vexera held her breath, her entire body rigid with tension as seconds ticked by without the promised explosion. Sarah, respond. David called again, and now Vexera could hear the first trace of genuine concern in his voice. A new voice crackled through the comm system, speaking human English with a calm professional tone. David, this is Sarah. Phoenix 7 acknowledged. Fusion cascade has been suspended at 97% critical. All human personnel are secure in escape pods. I'm maintaining the energy field around the boarding parties, but I can release them on your signal. David sagged slightly with relief, and Vexera realized that despite his perfect calm, he had been just as uncertain about the outcome as she was. Thank you, sweetheart. Phoenix 7 was always our best contingency. What? Vexera asked in a voice that shook despite her best efforts. Is Phoenix 7? David straightened, his friendly demeanor returning as if the last few minutes of existential terror had never happened. Phoenix 7 is our code for demonstrate human capabilities without actually committing species suicide. You see, Your Majesty, the cascade reaction was real. Sarah really could have turned our ship into a miniature star. But, she built in a final abort sequence that could only be triggered by a specific code phrase from me. You were bluffing, Commander Zektal accused, his mandibles snapping with outrage. No, David corrected firmly. I was negotiating. If you had refused our terms, if you had tried to call our bluff, if you had shown any indication that you intended to harm human children, Sarah would have completed the sequence. The Phoenix 7 abort was only possible if you demonstrated that you could be reasoned with. Vexera sank onto her throne, her 6 arms trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. You gambled the lives of everyone aboard both ships on your ability to judge my character. I gambled on the assumption that any species intelligent enough to build interstellar warships would be intelligent enough to recognize a superior tactical position when it was explained to them, David replied. Humans don't usually win through superior technology or greater numbers, Your Majesty. We win by being willing to take risks that our enemies can't comprehend. The implications of what had just occurred were staggering. This human engineer had manipulated one of the most feared military commanders in the galaxy into surrendering without firing a single shot. He had used psychology, tactical planning, and the threat of mutually assured destruction to achieve complete strategic victory against an overwhelmingly superior force. Your boarding parties will be released immediately, Vexera said, her voice hollow with defeat. Your people will be given safe passage to Federation space. And, the Zarathan Empire will reassess our policies regarding human settlements. That's very gracious of you, Your Majesty, David said with genuine warmth. I do hope this can be the beginning of better relations between our species. Humans prefer to make friends rather than enemies when possible. As the energy restraints fell away from David's wrists, Vexera watched him rub the circulation back into his hands with the same casual competence he had shown throughout the entire encounter. This unremarkable-looking maintenance worker had just taught the Zarathan Empire's most successful military commander the most important lesson of her career: never underestimate a species that had learned warfare by fighting itself. Before you go, Vexera said quietly, I have to know. Would you really have gone through with it? Would you have sacrificed your own ship and people? David paused at the chamber's exit and looked back at her with those deceptively mild brown eyes. Your Majesty, you ordered your warriors to separate human children from their parents. You threatened the survival of our young. If you hadn't surrendered when you did, if you had shown any intention of harming those children. He shrugged. Humans have destroyed entire worlds to protect our families. One colony ship would have been a small price to pay. The chamber door sealed behind him, leaving Vexera alone with the terrifying knowledge that the Zarathan Empire had just encountered something unprecedented in their millennium of conquest, a species more ruthlessly dedicated to warfare than themselves. And they had made first contact by threatening the one thing humans would never allow to be harmed: their children. As reports came in of the human boarding parties being safely released and the colony ship's escape pods reaching the asteroid field, Vexera made a decision that would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. The Zarathan Empire had conquered 17 species by being the most dangerous predator in space. But they had just learned that humans were not prey. Humans were something far more dangerous: competitors. 3 days after the encounter with the human colony ship, Queen Vexera stood in the most secure briefing chamber aboard the Crimson Dominion, surrounded by her highest-ranking officers. The holographic displays showed detailed analysis of everything they had learned about humanity, and the information painted a picture that challenged everything the Zarathan Empire believed about galactic warfare. My queen, reported Intelligence Director Yashkal, her serpentine form coiled around her workstation, our xenobiological analysis of the human prisoners has revealed disturbing information about their species' evolution. These beings developed on a death world. Vexera's primary eyes focused on the data while her secondary eyes continued monitoring other displays. Explain. Their homeworld, Earth, has a gravity 20% higher than the galactic standard. The atmosphere contains reactive oxygen that would be toxic to most species. The planet experiences regular catastrophic weather events, tectonic instability, and has undergone at least 5 mass extinction events in its geological history. The humans evolved not just to survive in this environment, but to thrive in it. Commander Zektal's mandibles clicked nervously. That explains their physical resilience, but not their tactical sophistication. Actually, it does, interjected Chief Tactical Analyst Morzen, her multiple eyes blinking in sequence as she accessed different data streams. The humans never developed a unified world government until after they achieved interstellar flight. For their entire recorded history, they were divided into competing nations, tribes, and ideological groups. They have been continuously at war with each other for over 10,000 years. The implications sent a chill through the assembled officers. Most spacefaring species achieved planetary unity early in their technological development, then focused their aggressive impulses on expansion and conquest. The idea of a species that had spent millennia perfecting warfare against its own kind was deeply unsettling. How many wars have they fought? Vexera asked, though she dreaded the answer. Morzen consulted her displays. Based on their historical records, we estimate approximately 15,000 distinct armed conflicts of various scales. They have fought wars over territory, resources, religion, ideology, trade routes, royal succession, ethnic differences, and concepts so abstract that our translators cannot properly render them into Zarathan. 15,000, Vexera repeated slowly. The Zarathan Empire has fought 17 campaigns of conquest over a millennium. It gets worse, my queen, Yeshkol continued. Their planet's ecosystem is based on predation. Every species on their world evolved either as a predator or as prey that developed defensive capabilities. The humans are apex predators who then developed technology and society. They are literally evolved killers who learn to think. The briefing chamber fell silent as the officers absorbed this information. The Zarathan had evolved on a relatively peaceful world with abundant resources and few natural predators. Their military prowess came from technological advancement and strategic thinking, not from genetic programming toward violence. There's more, Morzen added reluctantly. Their psychological profiles show remarkable adaptability to combat stress. Where most species develop trauma responses that discourage future violence, humans appear to develop enhanced aggression and tactical thinking in response to life-threatening situations. They literally become more dangerous the more they are threatened. Vexera thought of David Chen's cold calculation in the face of mutual annihilation. The human hadn't been afraid, he had been conducting a complex tactical analysis while calmly counting down to his own potential death. What about their reproductive strategies? Highly unusual, Yeshkol reported. Most advanced species reproduce rapidly and, in large numbers to offset natural losses. Humans have a very low reproductive rate but invest enormous resources in each offspring. A typical human couple will produce only 2 to 4 children during their entire reproductive lifespan, but they will sacrifice anything, including their own lives, to protect those children. That explains the colony ship, Vexera murmured. The adult humans were willing to die to ensure their children's survival because their evolutionary programming makes offspring protection the highest priority. Precisely, Morzen confirmed. And, here's the most troubling aspect, this psychological trait extends beyond their biological offspring to include all young humans, and, by extension, all members of their social group. They form what they call pack bonds that override individual survival instincts. Commander Zektel shifted uncomfortably. My queen, are you suggesting that we cannot defeat them through conventional intimidation? Vexera was quiet for a long moment, remembering David Chen's terrifying smile when he explained what humans did to protect their families. I'm suggesting that we have never encountered anything like them. Every species we have conquered submitted when faced with superior force because they prioritized species survival over individual battles. Humans appear to operate on the opposite principle. The more threatened they become, the more willing they are to ensure mutual destruction. Surely their government can be reasoned with, suggested political analyst Kekstar. No civilized species would sanction the kind of suicidal tactics we witnessed. Actually, Yeshkol said grimly, their government not only sanctions such tactics, they train their civilians in them. Every human colony ship carries detailed protocols for what they call scorched earth resistance. If attacked by superior forces, they are instructed to deny the enemy any strategic advantage even if it means destroying themselves. The holographic displays shifted to show intercepted human communication protocols. The text was rendered in Zarathan script, but the implications were clear. Human civilian vessels were equipped not just for transportation and colonization, but for warfare against technologically superior enemies. This is madness, Zektal protested. No rational species would militarize their entire civilian population. They would if they had spent 10,000 years learning that surrender often leads to extinction, Vexera replied thoughtfully. The humans haven't just been fighting each other, Commander. They've been learning from each other. Every tactical innovation, every strategic doctrine, every psychological warfare technique developed by any human culture has been absorbed and refined by their entire species. She gestured toward the displays showing human historical data. Look at their military academies. They study not just their own wars, but theoretical conflicts, abstract strategic scenarios, and historical battles from civilizations that existed thousands of years ago. They have turned warfare into an academic discipline. My queen, Morzen said hesitantly, there's one more thing. Our analysis of their technology suggests that everything we've seen is deliberately primitive. The fusion drive systems, the basic armor, the simple weapons, it all appears to be designed for civilian use. We have no intelligence on their actual military capabilities. Vexera felt her blood chill. Are you saying the colony ship was not representative of human defensive capabilities? Correct. Based on power requirements and engineering sophistication visible in their civilian technology, we estimate their military vessels are at least 2 technological generations more advanced. The colony ship was literally the equivalent of a refugee transport, yet they nearly destroyed our flagship with it. The briefing chamber erupted in agitated chittering and clicking as the officers absorbed the implications. If human civilians could pose a serious threat to Zarathan warships, what could their actual military forces accomplish? My queen, Intelligence Director Yashkal said quietly, I recommend we consider a formal non-aggression treaty with the Human Federation. Our standard conquest strategies appear to be not just ineffective against this species, but actively counterproductive. You're suggesting we negotiate with primitives? Zektal demanded. I'm suggesting we avoid making enemies of a species that views mutual annihilation as an acceptable strategic outcome, Yashkal replied firmly. The humans have demonstrated that they cannot be intimidated, cannot be broken through conventional warfare, and possess both the technology and the psychology necessary to inflict catastrophic damage even in defeat. Vexera studied the assembled data, her mind working through tactical scenarios and strategic implications. The Zarathan Empire had built its power on a simple principle: overwhelming force applied against species that could be made to surrender. Humans had just proven that principle invalid. There's something else to consider, she said slowly. David Chen mentioned that every human colony ship transmits detailed records of attacks to hidden beacons. If that's true, then the Human Federation already knows everything about our ships, our weapons, our tactics, and our location. Surely you don't believe they would risk war with the Zarathan Empire over a single colony ship? Morzen asked. Vexera remembered the look in David Chen's eyes when he spoke about human children crying as they were separated from their parents. Analyst Morzen, you're thinking like a Zarathan. We fight wars for territory, resources, and strategic advantage. Humans appear to fight wars for reasons we can barely comprehend. Honor. Revenge. Protection of abstract principles. She activated the central hologram, displaying the tactical situation throughout their sector of space. Look at our conquest pattern. 17 species over a millennium, each one falling within months of initial contact. We achieved this through superior technology and ruthless efficiency. But humans don't appear to care about technological superiority or efficiency. They care about survival and protection of their young. My queen, Commander Zektal said uncertainly, what are you proposing? Vexera was quiet for several minutes, processing everything she had learned. The Zarathan Empire faced a choice that none of her predecessors had ever been forced to make. They could continue their expansion and inevitably clash with humanity in a war that would be unlike anything they had ever fought, or they could adapt their strategies to account for this unprecedented enemy. I'm proposing that we send a formal diplomatic mission to the Human Federation, she said finally. We will offer reparations for the attack on the colony ship, a non-aggression treaty, and, potentially even trade agreements. The shock in the room was palpable. In the entire history of the Zarathan Empire, they had never negotiated with a species they had attacked. Conquest or destruction were the only options they had ever needed. My queen, Yeshkal said carefully, the other species we've conquered will interpret diplomatic relations with humans as a sign of weakness. Let them, Vexera replied firmly. The other 16 species we've conquered combined never posed a fraction of the strategic threat that humanity represents. If they choose to rebel because they think we become weak, we'll remind them why they surrendered in the first place. But, humans. She paused, remembering David Chen's terrifying competence. Humans are not prey. They're not even competitors. There's something new. What are they then? Zektal asked. Vexera looked around the briefing chamber at her assembled officers, the finest military minds the Zarathan Empire had produced over centuries of conquest. They're teachers, she said quietly. They're teaching us that there are some enemies too dangerous to make, some species too resilient to conquer, and some principles worth dying for that we never understood before. As the briefing concluded and her officers dispersed to implement the new diplomatic initiatives, Vexera remained alone with the holographic displays showing human capabilities and psychology. For the first time in her reign, she faced the possibility that the Zarathan Empire might not be the apex predator of the galaxy. And, strangely, she found that possibility more exciting than terrifying. 6 weeks later, the diplomatic vessel's silent approach emerged from hyperspace at the coordinates David Chen had provided for the nearest human Federation outpost. What Vexera expected to find was a modest space station or perhaps a small military base. What she found instead made her question every assumption her intelligence analysts had made about human capabilities. The Kepler station stretched across 15 kilometers of space, its modular construction suggesting it had been built for both expansion and defense. Dozens of ships moved in carefully orchestrated patterns around the station, from massive cargo haulers to sleek vessels that could only be warships despite their civilian markings. The entire complex hummed with an energy that spoke of industrial capacity and military readiness on a scale the Zarathan Empire had never attributed to humanity. My queen, reported Navigation Officer Hektel, were being scanned by at least 30 different sensor arrays. The resolution and penetration depth suggests technology significantly more advanced than what we observed on the colony ship. Vexera nodded, unsurprised. The disparity between human civilian and military technology was becoming increasingly apparent. Open communication channels. Standard diplomatic frequencies. A human voice responded within seconds, speaking fluent Zarathan with only the slightest accent. Zarathan vessel silent approach, this is Kepler Station traffic control. You are cleared for approach to diplomatic berth 7. Please maintain current heading and reduce velocity to 1/4 impulse. Be advised that this is a weapons-free zone under Federation maritime law. The casual competence in the controller's voice reminded Vexera uncomfortably of David Chen. There was no hostility, no excitement at encountering aliens for the first time, just professional efficiency. As if dealing with Zarathan diplomatic vessels was routine rather than unprecedented. How do they know our ship's name? Commander Zektal muttered. We never transmitted it. Because they've been tracking us since we entered the system, Vexera replied grimly. Possibly since we entered their space. The humans have been watching us just as carefully as we've been watching them. The approach to Kepler Station revealed more disturbing details about human capabilities. The docking facilities were designed to accommodate vessels of various sizes and configurations, suggesting regular contact with multiple alien species. The defensive emplacements were subtle but unmistakable to trained eyes, weapon hardpoints disguised as communication arrays, shield generators integrated into the station's superstructure, and what appeared to be fighter launch bays camouflaged as cargo handling facilities. My queen, intelligence officer Yashkal reported from her analysis station, this entire facility is a fortress designed to look like a civilian outpost. The defensive capabilities rival our major military installations. As they completed docking procedures, Vexera observed human personnel moving with practiced efficiency through the station's corridors visible through viewports. No one seemed particularly interested in or alarmed by the arrival of a Zarathan diplomatic vessel. Either humans had excellent discipline, or contact with aliens was far more common than intelligence estimates suggested. The airlock cycled, and Vexera stepped through accompanied by a small diplomatic party. Waiting on the other side was a human she immediately recognized as military despite his civilian clothes. Tall, graying at the temples, with the same dangerous competence in his eyes that she had seen in David Chen. "Your Majesty," the human said in perfect Zarathan, offering what she recognized as a formal diplomatic bow. "I'm Admiral Harrison, Federation Diplomatic Corps. Welcome to Kepler Station. I understand you have a proposal regarding the recent incident with the UES New Horizon." Vexera studied Admiral Harrison carefully. His demeanor was polite but not deferential, professional but not submissive. He stood like someone accustomed to command, comfortable in his own power, completely unintimidated by the presence of alien royalty. "Admiral, I've come to offer formal reparations for our attack on your colony ship and to discuss terms for a non-aggression treaty between our species." "That's very generous," Admiral Harrison replied, gesturing for them to follow him deeper into the station. "Though I should mention that the incident has already been resolved to everyone's satisfaction. Chief Engineer Chan and Dr. Chan are both well, as are all the colonists. But I'm sure we can find areas of mutual interest to discuss." The corridors they walked through were impressive in their understated efficiency. The architecture suggested a people comfortable with long-term space habitation, and the technology visible in wall panels and workstations was clearly more advanced than anything the Zarathan had observed on human civilian vessels. More importantly, every human they encountered moved with the same calm professionalism, as if the presence of aliens was perfectly normal. "Admiral," Vexera said carefully, "may I ask how long your people have been in contact with other species? Your personnel seem remarkably comfortable with alien visitors." Admiral Harrison's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Oh, we've been expecting you for quite some time, Your Majesty. The Federation maintains diplomatic relations with 43 different species throughout this sector. The Zarathan Empire is actually one of the few major powers we hadn't encountered yet." The implications hit Vexera like a physical blow. While the Zarathan Empire had been methodically conquering 17 species over the past millennium, humanity had been quietly building a network of alliances and trade relationships with dozens of civilizations. The intelligence failure was staggering. They entered a conference room that managed to be both impressive and comfortable, with seating arrangements adapted for various alien physiologies. A holographic display showed a three-dimensional map of local space, with trade routes, alliance boundaries, and territorial markers clearly defined. The Zarathan Empire's conquests were clearly marked, but they represented only a small fraction of the inhabited systems in the region. "Before we begin formal negotiations," Admiral Harrison said, settling into his chair with casual authority, "I should probably bring you up to speed on the current political situation. I understand the Zarathan Empire may not be fully aware of recent developments." New markers appeared on the holographic display, showing fleet movements, diplomatic communications, and alliance structures that had apparently been developing for decades without Zarathan knowledge. Vexera realized with growing alarm that humanity wasn't just another primitive species stumbling toward the stars. They were a major political power with established relationships throughout the galaxy. The Federation Council has been monitoring Zarathan expansion for approximately 50 years, Admiral Harrison continued conversationally. Your conquest pattern was quite predictable, and several of our allies requested protection from potential future attacks. We've been preparing contingency plans for eventual contact with your empire. Contingency plans? Commander Zektal asked, his mandibles clicking with nervous tension. Military response protocols, mostly, Admiral Harrison replied with the same casual tone he might use to discuss weather reports. Fleet positioning, resource allocation, strategic assessments of Zarathan capabilities and likely tactical doctrines. Standard preparation for potential hostile contact. The room fell silent as the Zarathan delegation absorbed the implications. Everything they had believed about their position in the galaxy was wrong. The 17 species they had conquered weren't isolated civilizations, they were members or potential members of a vast interstellar community that viewed Zarathan expansion as a threat to regional stability. How many ships does the Federation fleet contain? Vexera asked quietly. Currently? About 15,000 vessels of various classes, Admiral Harrison replied matter-of-factly. Though that includes civilian auxiliaries, cargo transports, and obsolete hulls relegated to training duties. Our frontline combat strength is somewhat smaller. 15,000 ships. The Zarathan Empire's entire fleet numbered fewer than 800 vessels, and they had considered themselves the dominant military power in their region of space. Vexera felt the foundations of her worldview crumbling. Admiral, she said carefully, if your people possess such overwhelming military superiority, why haven't you intervened in our conquests before now? Admiral Harrison leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming more serious. Several reasons, Your Majesty. First, the species you've conquered weren't Federation members, so we had no treaty obligations to defend them. Second, your expansion was slow enough and limited enough that it didn't pose an immediate threat to our interests. And, third, we were curious about your capabilities and motivations. You were studying us, Vexera said, understanding dawning. Extensively. Every engagement you've fought, every tactical doctrine you've employed, every technological innovation you've developed. We've been building detailed profiles of Zarathan military capabilities for decades. The attack on the New Horizon provided the final data points we needed to complete our assessment. The holographic display shifted to show detailed schematics of Zarathan vessels, including the Crimson Dominion. The level of detail was impossible unless human intelligence capabilities were far more sophisticated than anyone had suspected. Your Majesty, Admiral Harrison continued, I want to be completely clear about the situation. The Federation doesn't consider the Zarathan Empire to be an existential threat. Your military capabilities, while impressive, are insufficient to challenge our territorial integrity or threaten our core interests. However, your expansion pattern suggests eventual conflict is inevitable unless we reach some kind of accommodation. Vexera stared at the tactical display showing Federation fleet positions and realized that the Zarathan Empire was completely surrounded. Human allies controlled systems in every direction, their trade routes were monitored by Federation intelligence assets, and their military movements had been tracked and analyzed for decades. What kind of accommodation did you have in mind? She asked. Admiral Harrison's expression became more animated, as if they had finally reached the part of the conversation he found interesting. Integration, Your Majesty. The Federation is always interested in new members, especially those with unique capabilities and perspectives. The Zarathan Empire has developed impressive military technologies and tactical doctrines that could benefit the entire galactic community. You want us to surrender our independence? Not at all. We want you to recognize that independence and cooperation aren't mutually exclusive. The Federation is a voluntary association of sovereign species working together for mutual benefit. Members retain complete control over their internal affairs while cooperating on interstellar issues like trade, exploration, and defense against external threats. The holographic display showed the organizational structure of the Federation, and Vexera was surprised to see that it was remarkably decentralized. Each member species maintained its own government, military forces, and cultural institutions while participating in collective decisions about matters that affected multiple civilizations. What about the species we've already conquered? Commander Zektal asked. They would be offered Federation membership and protection from future aggression, Admiral Harrison replied. Existing territorial arrangements could be negotiated based on the principles of self-determination and mutual consent. Some might choose to maintain their current relationship with the Zarathan Empire if it's genuinely beneficial to both parties. Vexera realized that the humans were offering something unprecedented in her experience, the possibility of maintaining power and influence without constant expansion and conquest. The Federation model suggested that strength came from cooperation rather than domination, from diversity rather than uniformity. And if we refuse? Admiral Harrison's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes reminded her powerfully of David Chen in those final seconds before the fusion cascade. Your Majesty, I hope that won't be necessary. The Federation has no interest in conquest or occupation. But we also can't allow continued aggression against our allies or potential allies. If the Zarathan Empire chooses to maintain its current expansion policies, we would be forced to take appropriate defensive measures. The euphemistic language couldn't disguise the reality of the situation. Humanity and its allies possessed overwhelming military superiority, detailed intelligence on Zarathan capabilities, and strategic positions throughout the region. If the Zarathan Empire continued its pattern of conquest, it would face not individual weak species, but a coordinated alliance with 15,000 warships and 43 different technological bases to draw from. I need to consult with my advisors, Vexera said. Of course. Please take all the time you need. In the meantime, you're welcome to tour the station, meet with representatives from other Federation species, and get a better sense of how our alliance operates in practice. As they left the conference room, Vexera's mind raced through the implications of everything she had learned. The Zarathan Empire faced a choice that would define their future: adapt to a galaxy where cooperation was more powerful than conquest, or face destruction at the hands of enemies who had been preparing for this confrontation for decades. Either way, David Chen had been right about one thing. The Zarathan Empire had never met humans before, and that single encounter had changed everything. 2 years after the encounter with David Chen, Queen Vexera stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Zarathan Embassy on Kepler Station, watching human and alien children play together in the station's central park. The sight still amazed her. Zarathan younglings chasing human children in some incomprehensible game while their parents of 17 different species chatted casually nearby, as if such diversity was the most natural thing in the universe. The transformation had been swift once she made the decision. The Zarathan Empire had formally applied for Federation membership 18 months ago, and the integration process had exceeded all expectations. Zarathan military technology had proven invaluable to Federation defense initiatives, while human diplomatic and administrative systems had revolutionized Zarathan governance of their conquered territories. Not conquered anymore, Vexera corrected herself. Integrated. The 17 species that had once been subjects of the Zarathan Empire were now fellow Federation members, their representatives serving alongside Zarathan officials in the expanded colonial administration. Some had chosen to maintain their historical relationships with the Zarathan homeworld, while others had established independent governments. All had benefited from the economic and technological exchange that Federation membership provided. "Your Majesty," came a familiar voice behind her. Vexera turned to see Admiral Harrison approaching, accompanied by two figures she recognized immediately. David and Sarah Chen, both wearing the simple uniforms of Federation Engineering Corps officers. Admiral. Chief Engineer Chen, Dr. Chen. Vexera offered the human-style handshake she had learned during her diplomatic training. "I understand congratulations are in order." Sarah Chen smiled, one hand resting on her slightly rounded belly. "Thank you, Your Majesty. We're very excited about the addition to our family." Vexera felt a complex mixture of emotions looking at the human couple. 2 years ago, she had threatened to process their children like livestock. Now she was genuinely pleased at the news of their pregnancy. The transformation in her own thinking was as profound as any of the political changes that had reshaped the galaxy. "I was hoping to speak with Chief Engineer Chen privately," Vexera said. "There's something I've been wanting to discuss with him." David nodded agreeably. "Of course, Your Majesty." "Sarah, I'll catch up with you later." "Admiral Harrison, thank you for arranging this meeting." They walked to a quiet corner of the observation deck, away from the crowds of mixed-species families enjoying the artificial afternoon. The view of space beyond showed dozens of ships from various civilizations moving in the careful dance of interstellar commerce. Zarathan vessels flew alongside human transports, alien freighters, and the sleek diplomatic ships of species Vexera was still learning to identify. "David," she said, using his given name as he had requested during their first diplomatic meeting, "I need to understand something that has been troubling me. During our encounter aboard the Crimson Dominion, you gambled everything on your ability to judge my character. How did you know I would choose to surrender rather than call your bluff?" David was quiet for several minutes, watching the ships beyond the viewport. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the same calm competence that had so unnerved her during their first meeting. "I didn't know, Your Majesty. I hoped." "Hoped based on what?" "Based on the fact that you had personally captured me rather than simply processing me with the other prisoners. You were curious about something you saw in me, which suggested you were capable of recognizing value in unexpected places. And, more importantly, you had achieved your position by being intelligent enough to make optimal tactical decisions under pressure. Vexera considered this. You assumed I was rational. I assumed you were adaptive, David corrected. The Zarathan Empire's conquest pattern showed sophisticated strategic thinking and long-term planning. That suggested a leadership capable of changing tactics when circumstances demanded it. I was betting that when faced with clear evidence that your current approach wouldn't work, you would be smart enough to try a different one. And, if you had been wrong? David shrugged with the same casual gesture she remembered from that terrifying countdown. Then, Sarah would have completed the fusion cascade, your flagship would have been crippled, and the Federation response fleet would have found a very different situation when they arrived 6 weeks later. The outcome for our children would have been the same, they would have survived and grown up knowing their parents died protecting them, but the political ramifications would have been much more severe. The matter-of-fact way he discussed potential mutual annihilation still chilled Vexera. You realize that your willingness to sacrifice both our crews to protect human children started a war that could have consumed entire star systems? Actually, David said thoughtfully, I think it prevented one. If we had submitted to standard Zarathan conquest protocols, if we had allowed ourselves to be processed and enslaved, the Federation would have eventually been forced to intervene. But it would have been a war of liberation rather than a war of first contact. Much bloodier, much more difficult to resolve diplomatically. The strategic implications were staggering. David Chen hadn't just been protecting his immediate family, he had been conducting interstellar diplomacy at a level that most governments never achieved. You manipulated the entire situation to force optimal outcomes for both species. I created an opportunity for communication, David corrected. Whether that communication led to cooperation or conflict depended on choices made by people much more important than me. You chose cooperation, Your Majesty. That made all the difference. They watched in companionable silence as a group of mixed-species teenagers practiced some kind of martial art in the park below. Zarathan younglings moved with fluid grace alongside human adolescents, their different physiologies creating an almost dance-like pattern of motion. 2 years ago, such cooperation would have been impossible to imagine. David, Vexera said eventually, there's something I need to tell you. Before our encounter, the Zarathan Empire had never failed to conquer a species we attacked. Our success rate was 100% over 1,000 years. You and your wife ended that record. I'm sorry if that damaged your reputation among your people. Vexera's mandibles clicked in what humans had learned to recognize as Zarathan laughter. Actually, it enhanced it enormously. The Zarathan respect strength above all else, and you demonstrated that our species had finally encountered an enemy worth respecting. My officers speak of that day with something approaching reverence. Because we nearly destroyed your flagship? Because you taught us that there are forms of strength we had never imagined. The willingness to sacrifice oneself for abstract principles, the ability to conduct complex psychological warfare while facing imminent death, the tactical sophistication to turn apparent defeat into strategic victory. My people had never encountered anything like it. David was quiet again, processing this information. What about now? How do your people feel about Federation membership? They're thriving, Vexera said honestly. Our military commanders are fascinated by human tactical doctrines and strategic thinking. Our scientists are collaborating with Federation researchers on projects we never could have imagined alone. Our young people are learning languages, customs, and ways of thinking that are expanding Zarathan culture in remarkable directions. She gestured toward the mixed-species families in the park below. And our children are growing up in a universe where cooperation is normal rather than exceptional. They'll never know a time when strength meant domination rather than mutual support. That's the most important change, David agreed. Sarah and I chose to risk everything not just to protect our immediate family, but to protect the kind of universe we wanted our children to inherit. It sounds like we succeeded. You did more than succeed. You created something unprecedented. Vexera paused, choosing her words carefully. David, I need you to understand something. The Zarathan Empire had become stagnant. We were powerful, successful, feared throughout our region of space, but we weren't growing anymore. We had perfected conquest, but we had forgotten how to evolve. And now we're learning again. Every day brings new challenges, new opportunities, new ways of thinking about problems we thought we had solved centuries ago. Federation membership hasn't diminished Zarathan's strength, it's revealed strength we didn't know we possessed. A chime sounded throughout the station, indicating the arrival of another diplomatic vessel. Through the viewport, they could see a sleek ship of unfamiliar design approaching the docking facilities. New species still joined the Federation regularly, drawn by the promise of cooperation rather than conquest. Another new member? David asked. The Kytherian Republic. They're fleeing persecution by a militaristic neighbor and seeking Federation protection. 2 years ago, the Zarathan Empire might have been that militaristic neighbor. Now we're helping to provide the protection they need. How does that feel? Vexera considered the question seriously. Satisfying in a way that conquest never was. When we conquered species, we gained their resources and territory, but we also gained their resentment and fear. When we help protect them, we gain their cooperation and friendship. The strategic advantages are actually much greater. Plus you sleep better at night. Plus I sleep better at night, she agreed. David, I want to thank you for something. During our first encounter, you could have simply triggered the fusion cascade immediately. You could have destroyed both our ships without warning, without negotiation, without giving me the opportunity to choose a different path. Why would I do that? The whole point was to protect human families and prevent future attacks on human civilians. Mutual annihilation wouldn't have achieved either goal. But it would have eliminated the immediate threat and sent a clear message to other potential aggressors. David shook his head. Your Majesty, humans don't fight wars to send messages. We fight wars to achieve specific objectives. My objective was to create a situation where Zarathan forces would never again attack human civilians. Federation membership for the Zarathan Empire accomplishes that goal much more effectively than mutual destruction would have. The casual competence in his voice reminded Vexera of their first meeting, but now she recognized it as something positive rather than terrifying. Humans didn't just plan for victory, they planned for optimal outcomes that served long-term strategic interests. It was a level of tactical sophistication that the Zarathan military was still learning to emulate. David, may I ask you a personal question? Of course. Do you ever regret not having children earlier? Before you knew the galaxy contained species that might threaten them? David smiled, the same warm expression she had seen when he spoke to his wife. Your Majesty, every generation of humans has faced threats their parents never imagined. Our great-grandparents faced world wars, our grandparents faced nuclear annihilation, our parents faced environmental collapse. Each generation finds ways to create a better world for their children than the one they inherited. And your generation? Our generation faced first contact with alien species and discovered that cooperation is more powerful than conquest. I think our children will inherit a pretty remarkable universe. Through the viewport, the Kytherian vessel completed its docking procedures while human, Zarathan, and allied personnel prepared to welcome the newest members of an ever-expanding galactic community. Vexera watched the process with satisfaction, knowing that each new addition made the Federation stronger and the galaxy more stable. David, she said quietly, that day aboard my flagship, when you were counting down to potential mutual annihilation, were you afraid? David was quiet for a long moment, watching the ships move through space in their careful patterns of commerce and diplomacy. Yes, he said finally. I was terrified. Not of dying, but of failing to protect my family and leaving my children in a universe where might made right. But I was also hopeful. Hopeful about what? That intelligence and compassion were stronger than fear and aggression. That even in the worst possible circumstances, rational beings could find common ground. He smiled at her. Turns out I was right. As they walked back toward the embassy quarters, Vexera reflected on the transformation that had begun with one human engineer's desperate gamble. The Zarathan Empire had entered Federation space as conquerors and discovered they could achieve far more as partners. Humanity had faced potential extinction and chosen to offer friendship instead of revenge. And The galaxy had become a place where children of dozens of species could play together while their parents planned cooperative ventures that would benefit civilizations yet unknown. It had been, Vex-Era reflected, the most successful failure in military history. And it had taught her the most important lesson of her long reign: sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating your enemies, but from discovering they were never your enemies at all. They had simply been potential friends you hadn't met yet.